Hello, this is Dr. Randy Wilt, and today we're going to be talking about listening, specifically active and strategic listening. But let's start off with a question. Are you listening? Do you listen actively, strategically, sympathetically? And why do you listen? Well, to get into that, I want to make a comparison. And the comparison is going to be between Beethoven and Boeing and what do they have in common. Well, let's talk about Beethoven first. Now, if you know the story of Beethoven, is that he was a composer, he was German, lived back in the early 1800s. And what's interesting about him is he went deaf right in the height of his career. Now, I don't mean partially deaf. He went totally deaf, could not hear anything at all, but he continued to write symphonies even though he was deaf. But what's interesting too is that Beethoven said that he could hear the music in his head, and he could not get it out of his head until actually he wrote it down. This is when he was deaf. And once he wrote it down, then he got the music out of his head. And he said the music was God speaking to him. It was the voice of God. That's how he describes music. The music is the voice of God, and that it was like God was actually saying things to him. Well, you're going to understand why he says that when you hear a little bit of his Fifth Symphony, which is in C minor, and listen to it. You almost can hear someone talking in this. Okay, that was Symphony number 5 in C minor, and I'm not a vocalist by no means, but you hear how it started. It starts with that da-da-da-dum, then goes da-da-da-dum, and then it comes back with another set of 3 notes. Now, when you listen to that and think about Beethoven, he said that this was a voice talking to him and he was speaking back. So it was not just a orator, it was a dialogue, it was a conversation. Now, what we don't know, because he didn't really elaborate, was God speaking to him and he was responding back, or was God telling him something, like maybe a story or so? So was God saying to Beethoven, what are you doing? Or was God, I have a master's in theology, so I was going back thinking of some stories in the Bible. And I was thinking about the story of Cain and Abel. Remember, that was the sons of Adam and Eve, and Cain actually killed Abel, and God said, where is your brother? Could this be, where is your brother? What have you done? And then you got Cain coming back and speaking again. So this is a great example of applying content to a sound. And Beethoven really kind of showed us how to do that. So as we look at this, I want you to listen to it again and put words to it. Try to think of some words that you can put to make this into a conversation. Now, you certainly can listen to the rest of this. It's, like I says, Beethoven's Fifth Symphony in C minor. Listen to the whole thing. You'll be able to put a whole conversation to it if you want to. And I'm not sure you actually put words to it, but I can almost bet you that the next time you hear that, you're going to remember this lecture about putting words to it. And what you're seeing here is listening is not the same as hearing. So what you were doing, you were hearing sounds. But what Beethoven was doing, he was hearing sounds, but psychologically it was an act for him because he was putting meaning and content and context to those sounds. And this is basically the way it's going to work, is that sounds come into you and you're explaining to yourself what those sounds mean by memory. Now, let me give an example. So a good example would be the voice, not the voice, the language of Japanese. Most of us do not understand Japanese. If I hear Japanese, to me, it's just noise. I cannot understand anything. But if it was in English, I can understand it because I have got different things in my memory bank that have learned what those sounds mean. So when I hear the word attention, I know what that means. I have the definition to attention. But when someone hears it in German, and the word intention in German is Achtung, they don't know what it means. It's just a sound. Achtung. Same thing if you hear Auf Wiedersehen. Now, I'm not a native speaker in German, but I do speak German. But I have heard these, and I have got a meaning attached to it, but the person sitting next to me doesn't. When he hears German, it's just sounds. So that is a difference between hearing and also in listening, because you're able to put a content in context to it. Now, take a look down here at this little diagram on the bottom right. And we'll kind of read some of this to you and explain to you how the whole process works. So the sound wave enters the outer ear and travels through a narrow passageway called the ear canal and gets to the eardrum. Okay, the bone in the middle of the ear, it amplifies it and increases the sound through vibrations. Okay, then there are hair cells that are near the wide end that detects the higher pitch and also the lower pitch, and those hair cells move up and down microscopically, and it projects to the auditory nerve the sounds, and the auditory nerve takes that sound and puts it into electrical signal, sends it to the brain, which is then recognized by your memory center, which is the thalamus and hippocampus. So basically, that's why when you hear something in Japanese, because it gets all the way over to the thalamus, to the hippocampus, it doesn't know what it is. It doesn't have anything to put to it. But when you hear that in English, it sends it over to your memory center. Your memory center looks at it and says, yes, okay, I know what that sound means. So that's a good understanding of the way listening works compared to just hearing. Now, why am I telling you about all this? First of all, is active listening is very important. Is what's going to make you to be a good manager, to know how to manage people, how to understand people, and maybe how to create your own business someday. If you look at this, you communicate 100% of the time. 45% of the time, you're going to listen. 30% you're going to speak and read and write. The other 16 and 9%. Why did I say Beethoven and Boeing? What do they have to do with each other? Well, Boeing is very interesting because the senior VP of HR at Boeing, his name was Rick Stevens, said this. He says, there's not one specific thing or skill people have to work for us. I can tell you why we fire people. We hire on hard skills. We fire on soft skills. Think about that for a second. We hire on hard skills, but we fire on soft skills. Now, hard skills, you maybe already know, those are your analytical skills. That's your mathematics. It could be, sciences, engineering. It's those analytical, quantitative skills. Where soft skills are more qualitative. LinkedIn came out with a listing of the top 10 most sought after soft skills. Number 1, good communicator. There we go. Communications. Well-organized team player, punctual, critical thinker, all the way down. But what's the number 1 thing is good communications. There's your communications. You're going to be a good communicator. 45% of that communication is what? Listening. So if all you're doing is hearing noises and not actually listening to it, but you're just hearing, half of your communication is basically unimportant then. You've got to listen and put meaning to that. Now, let me explain that a little bit more in detail. Is that there's several myths about listening. First of all, people say listening is easy. No, it is not easy. Listening is difficult. There's a lot of distractions in listening. There's a lot of things that draw people away from actually getting the right context to what they're hearing. The second thing is listening. We all hear the same thing, and certainly that's not true. You can look at this right here. You can say the word tree, and one person sees the Christmas tree, and the other person sees the apple tree. I'm going to give you an example. Back in the 1990s, now I'm showing you my age, there was a commercial about the Ford Bronco. There's a couple sitting there. They're going to have a romantic dinner that night. And she says, honey, let's have a romantic candlelit dinner by the fire. And so what does the husband see? He sees a campfire out in the wilderness, just the two of them, dark with the flame that's coming up, and they're sharing a campfire meal. What does the wife see? She sees a French restaurant, a nice little table in the corner where it's very dim and there's a candle lit there, and they're sharing a nice French dinner. So the words are the same, but the understanding, the content to what they saw was completely different. So types of listening. We've got 4 different types. We've got the fact listening, which is listening to remember things. That's where you may be listening to try to remember things for an exam. You have active listening, which typically you do to foster a relationship. You're trying to pick up content in there. You have empathetic listening, which you're trying to support emotionally. And last one is strategic listening, where you're trying to shape the outcome. Now let's look at active/strategic listening. There are 6 components of it: hearing, understanding, remembering, interpreting, evaluating, and responding. All 6 of those occur during the process. And some of the ones that are the most important is understanding it, remember it, put it into your memory bank so that you can bring it back out later, and interpreting it, like looking at the nonverbal. That's not even listening. That's just looking at things, but also hearing, like pitches. You remember Beethoven's Fifth? Some of it, we have what we call the crescendo. It got louder, it got softer, it sped up, it slowed down. So these are how you interpret different things that you are listening to, the evaluation and then the responding. We'll put that in a graphic form for you. So let's say, first of all, you're going to be sensing things. When you sense it, you're trying to understand it by getting rid of, let's say, your evaluation too early or interruptions. You have to maintain a very direct interest on it. Then you're going to evaluate. You're going to empathize or organize the thoughts. You're trying to figure out how important it is, what the values are, and then you're going to respond. You're going to respond by either an action, or you're going to show interest, or maybe you're going to ask questions in it. So, are you listening? Let's see what type of listener you are. And this is part 1 to 2 parts. So we're going to kind of conclude here with this little assessment. Now, be honest as you take this assessment. This is not great or anything. It's certainly not scientific. This is just a cute little assessment to see how good of a listener you are. So what you've got to do is take a sheet of paper. Hopefully you've got one, pen or pencil, I'm sorry, and number it down 1 to 10. Now I'm going to ask you 10 different questions, and you need to answer with a yes or a no. Now don't overthink it. Just put down the first thing you're thinking about. But once again, be kind of honest. Don't try to see if you can get the highest one by putting down what you think the right answer is. Put down what you are. So the first one, for example, is during the past 2 weeks, can you recall an incident where you thought someone thought you were not listening to them? Now think about that. Can you think of the time when people maybe didn't think you were listening, that you were just kind of looking off the wrong direction, you were not paying attention? Yes or no. Number 2, when someone else is talking, do you feel relaxed at least 90% of the time? So are you relaxed, or are you stressed when you're listening to somebody? When someone else is talking, do you maintain eye contact with them most of the time, or are you looking elsewhere? Now let me give you kind of an example. I have a good friend. He's a primary care physician, and anytime I talk to him, he's looking down. And I say, Dan, why are you looking down? And he said, well, Randy, he said, that's the way we're taught in med school, is when someone's talking to you, look down to avoid all the distractions. You don't want to be seeing things out the window. I don't want to be looking at you wondering why you wore that shirt with that coat. He says, I'll look down to avoid all those distractions. Well, you know what they found out in the med school? They found out that when doctors looked down, the patient felt like the doctor was not interested, so therefore the patient stopped talking. So now, like my friend told me, he says, now in med school, they tell you look straight at the patient, look them in the eyes, and that keeps them talking and doesn't make them think that you're not interested. Okay. Yes or no? Do you get defensive when someone else tells you something that you disagree with? Number 5, when someone's talking to you, do you ask questions to clarify what they're saying, or do you just kind of keep it quiet, hoping maybe you're going to figure it out on your own? Let's go over to the next one, number 6. In a conversation, do you sometimes overreact to information? Yes or no? Number 7, do you ever jump in and finish what the other person is saying? Now, I have to tell you, My wife and I, we've been married for over 40 years, and she knows exactly what I'm saying. She jumps in there, but every now and then she doesn't know what I'm actually trying to say. I'm kind of like, honey, if you waited for just another moment or so here, you would probably have figured out what I was talking about. So, do you jump in? Yes or no? Number 8, do you often change your opinion after talking something over with the person? Basically, what that says is that, are you listening? Does it cause you to change your opinion or not change your opinion? Number 9, when someone is trying to communicate something to you, do you often do too much of the talking? Okay, now that's kind of what we call interrupting. And when you interrupt, you kind of grab the floor. Some people literally, they wait till they can get the moment when the person takes a breath or pauses. They can jump in, grab the floor, and take over the talking. Do you do that? Do you do it some? Do you do a little bit? Yes or no? And the last one there is when someone is talking to you, do you often play with a pen, your pencil, keys, something around you on the desk? Are you playing with something as you listen to them? Now, your answers are going to be no, yes, yes, no, yes. No, no, yes, no, no. Did you get all that? Probably not, but let's go through this one at a time. So during the past 2 weeks, can you recall when someone thought you were not listening? I hope you said no. Maybe you said yes. When someone else is talking, are you relaxed 90% of the time? Well, you should be, even though you probably are not. Maybe we're not. Number 3, when someone else is talking, do you maintain eye contact? Well, you should. Do you get defensive? No, I hope you don't. And do you ask lots of clarifying questions? I hope you would. Unfortunately, most of us do not. Sometimes you overreact. No, you're supposed to not overreact. You're supposed to sit there and listen to everything and then make your judgment instead of making too early. Do you jump in and finish? I hope you don't, but unfortunately we do. Do you change your opinion? Yes. You should change your opinion as you talk more to somebody, as you listen to more of the content. And now, that's saying that your opinion may be right or wrong, but you're not just blocking off the ability to change an opinion. When someone is trying to communicate something to you, do you do too much of the talking? I hope not. And also, I hope you're not playing with a pen or pencil or your keys when someone's talking. So how good of a listener are you? So if you look at this here, 9 or 10 correct answers, you're an excellent listener. If you have a 7 or 8 correct answers, you're a good listener. 5 or 6, you're an average listener. And less than 5, well, you're just not very good at all about listening, are you? But unfortunately, let me tell you how this works out. There's very few 9 or 10s out there in the world. And if you're in your 20s or 30s, you actually come through as a 7 or 8. You're actually a good listener. The people who are 5s are typically the people who are older. People who are in their 50s or 60s. I mean, I'm in that age group. Now, why does that happen, you say? Why did you become a worse listener? You know, and the reason why is what we refer to as life benefits or life experiences. So, for example, I'm in that group, and I've lived a long time, you know that, from being married for over 40 years, and I have all these life experiences out there, and when someone's talking to me, I bring all these memories out, and I kind of hear things and evaluate and interpret based upon my memories, and sometimes I jump in, sometimes I have my own opinions, I don't change my opinions, I don't ask questions. So what we have seen is that people who are, let's say, 50, 60 or higher, they're not particularly great listeners, and it's because of those life experiences. Okay, people who are in their 30s and 40s, they're actually pretty good listeners, and those who are in their 20s actually are the best listeners. But as you get below there, like, you know, children, they're not good listeners. Why is that? Because they're too busy thinking about how they're going to respond. And think about what they're listening to. They're typically listening to instructions from a teacher or from a parent, so they're not actually having a very, very strong dialogue. So that is where we're going to stop today, and we will be going into part 2. I hope you enjoyed this so far, and I look forward to talking with you in part 2.